Hello again. Welcome back to Faith Matters. I'm the Most Reverend Bennett D.D. Burke, Bishop of the Liberal Catholic Diocese of Arizona. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about faith and spirituality from a progressive point of view. If you're looking for that old-time religion, the Liberal Catholic Church does offer the traditional sacramental form of worship, but we combine it with the widest measure of intellectual liberty and respect for the individual conscience. Today we're welcoming back to the show Jason Cianciotto, Executive Director of Wingspan, Southern Arizona's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community center. Welcome back, Jason.
Thanks
so much.
Glad
to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, the last time you were here with us, we talked about your personal journey, and we talked about Wingspan's mission in general and some of the visions that you had for Wingspan going forward into the future. Today I'd like to focus a little more deeply on a few of the issues we touched on the last time you were here with us.
Sure.
So today I'd like to talk a little bit about what you see as the issues facing Wingspan and Arizona after the recent election with the defeat of the gay marriage, or actually passage of the anti-gay marriage legislation, and what some of the other challenges might be in the political climate, in the faith climate of Arizona and the nation, and where we need to go forward for more welcome and inclusion. So what are some of the issues that you and Wingspan are going to be paying attention to in the upcoming year?
Well, I think that the direction that we want to go in was really exemplified by how the community came together after the passage of Prop 102, the so-called marriage measure. You recall that Arizona was the only state in the nation to ever have defeated such a measure 2 years ago in 2006. And so I think it was particularly challenging in our state to have both tasted victory and also dealt with defeat just 2 years later. And I was honored for Wingspan to help to lead organize a community march and rally that happened on just Friday the 14th of November, I believe. And we symbolically met in front of City Hall in downtown, and the place where someday our families will go to receive the same legal recognition that other couples often take for granted. And we marched across a footbridge from El Presidio Park over into La Placita Park. Okay. And for us, that was a march from anger into action. Oh. Because I actually differ in opinion with some of the other leaders and organizations who focus just on the protest in response to both Prop 102's passage, Prop 8's passage in California. And Florida, and then the anti-adoption measure in Arkansas.
Ah, that's right.
And, I think that it's my responsibility, it's our movement's responsibility to help guide the community to action that can really create long-term change. And just going out onto the street with signs in large numbers, yes, for that one night, for that one moment, for that 10 seconds on television, that may produce a personally good feeling, and it may be make some kind of social statement, but after that night, it's over.
Right.
And the next day, you have all of the leaders of the often faith-based organizations who've been pursuing anti-gay policies talking about how they're the persecuted group because we're marching against them. It really only feeds into the strategy they've been using against our movement for years. And so what we did at Wingspan was provide that opportunity to publicly express anger and outrage and frustration, and then say, here's what we really need to do to make a difference. We need to start being more open about who we are, who our families are, and why we deserve the same legal protections and recognition that everybody else has. The longer we ghettoize ourselves, we hide ourselves in fear, the longer it's going to take for us to achieve that. Because we know that often the greatest indicator of support for equality is if someone happens to have a friend, a neighbor, a family member, or a coworker who identifies as LGBT. Right. So we launched a brand new campaign that we're really excited about. It's called Families You Know, and you can check it out on familiesyouKnow.com.
Great.
And it's a website where you can upload a YouTube video about your family, or upload a family photo and a story. And really important to this is that we are not choosing what the definition of family is. In fact, the whole goal of this website is to rescue the definition of family, which has been hijacked by the religious right and conservatives to not only not represent LGBT people, but also most straight families,
Right.
which don't necessarily conform to that.
The Ozzie and Harriet standard of the 1950s
Right.
with heterosexual couple,
Right.
2.5 children, dog, cat.
Right,
And
exactly.
there are very, very few families in America that are actually like that.
Right. And so we're saying come to this website and introduce yourself and your family to the community. Maybe you're a female same-sex couple who've adopted a child. Maybe you're a single person who's caring for an elderly gay family member.
Okay.
Maybe for years you've been living with a group of roommates who have been your best friends for years, and you formed a family unit together. Just share what your family and who your family is, and let's introduce ourselves to our neighbors in our community, because I think that is how we're going to prevent these marriage and other anti-gay ballot measures from happening again.
That's great. Well, that's a great idea. I know you and I had lunch a few months ago, and I remember moments ago you talked about needing a plan, and I remember
Right.
you and I had a pleasant lunch talking about some philosophical issues, and
Right.
just as we were concluding our lunch, you said, what do we do next?
Right.
Let's figure out what we have to do to put that into place. And I agree with you. I think that's very, very important, that it is often pleasant to talk about the issues philosophically, but if we don't actually have a plan, a
Right.
concerted effort to make change, then
Right.
all those good intentions don't necessarily go anywhere.
Right.
So what are some of the things that we all have to do to achieve greater welcome and inclusion of LGBT people on the faith side, on the political side here in Arizona? What are the challenges, the barriers, and what do we need to do to overcome some of those things?
Well, let's talk about the faith side, which obviously is an important subject for you and
bet.
for this program. And I was really moved and touched by the group of progressive clergy from multiple faiths who came together to help fight against Prop 102 here in Southern Arizona. We held No on Prop 102, which was the political action committee that formed. It was separate from Wingspan, but supported by, pulled together an amazing group of people from Reform Judaism to Sikh, who came together and hosted a press conference to talk from a faith perspective about why they were opposing Prop 102. And then I think I was even more touched and moved by the interfaith service that was hosted prior to the election. I have a hard time even just sitting in a church. I've described it in the past as almost having like a post-traumatic stress response to hearing those prayers, to singing those hymns, to just being in that environment, because of how painful it was to be ripped away from the faith that I was raised in ever since I was 2 years old, up until I was age 16 when they kicked me out. And so just the act of sitting in that congregation, in that church, and hearing a wide variety of ministers, pastors, rabbis expressing support for me as who I am fundamentally, and not someone that they think I need to be, that I need to change to become, was an amazing, amazing experience.
That's wonderful.
And that is the healing experience that I hope that a wider variety of our community members can have through a continued growth of that faith coalition.
That's wonderful. And I'll say at this point, on behalf of some of Tucson's great faith communities, as well as Wingspan's promotion of those, the Rainbow Families Coalition, and there's information available at Wingspan, brochures and other information about welcoming faith communities of a wide variety of faith traditions, so that if anybody who's watching us needs to, is interested in finding a welcoming faith home where they might have that same experience you have, turn some of those past negative feelings about being in a church or a faith community or a temple or a synagogue or a worship service, and turn those into positive experiences. There are many faith communities in this town that can help provide that. So Wingspan's a great resource for connecting people to those communities.
Absolutely. I think that we have a lot of work to do just to introduce this notion that part of a whole life is mind, body, and spirit. and that our community needs to feed its spirit in whatever way it wants to.
Right.
So maybe it's coming to one of your congregations of the Liberal Catholic Church and reconnecting with that. Maybe it's getting involved in some form of artistic expression that connects them to a spiritual component of who they are. But we need to remember that our community's needs are more than just dealing with health disparities or coming out issues or discrimination, that we need to feed our souls. And as Wingspan's community center, I feel like it's my responsibility to help make sure the organization can connect people with opportunities to feed their souls.
And those opportunities, I think, are very important, again, as you say, regardless of what those opportunities might be. I heard a quote by a Christian pastor in, I think it was Mesa a number of years ago, and I read this in the newspaper, and I've since adopted it, and I always try to give credit when I use it, but he talked about worship services as being the locker room where we come to refresh and recharge. The game is out there, but we come to worship as the locker room to recharge. So whatever those things are that feed our souls, it's it can regenerate our inspiration, our motivation, our energy to go back and do the work that still needs to be done, but without that inner core, sometimes we use ourselves up, burn ourselves out on the work.
Exactly, and you know, there's a next step since we started talking about that after that, which is we've introduced as part of our advertising that Wingspan is your community, your center, and the point is that we want to attach taking care of the individual self as a component of caring for the community. And so the practical application from sort of feeding the soul that we're talking about is when people go and feed that aspect of themselves, I think that we've seen, and there are studies that show that that is a great way to deal with some health disparities, addictions, that people have found themselves in depression. And just because our community has been discriminated against from a faith perspective doesn't mean that we have to exclude that from our lives. And after we've cared for ourselves, then we need to use the social networking component that has been used against us, right? The religious right organizes through their congregations. Well, we need to organize through our social networks, including faith networks, and get our progressive congregations and progressive faith leaders to talk about LGBT issues in their congregations in the same way that the religious right talks about anti-LGBT issues in their congregations.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I like to remind our congregants and others when I have the opportunity is that no one has the right to tell you, me, or anyone else that we're not Christians. There's one requirement in, and of course all my brothers and sisters in other faith communities, other faith traditions have their way of approaching welcomeness and inclusion, but from a Christian perspective, what I like to remind people is there's one requirement and one requirement only to be a Christian, and that's to have been baptized as a Christian. And after that, we're Christians, and nobody gets to tell us we're not. So it's our job to stand up and say, yes, we are Christians, and we are also this or that. But we are still Christians, and to speak up, as you say, and similarly what you said earlier about families, this is who we are as a family. Well, these are who we are as faith people, and we are people of faith, regardless of what someone else might think
whether
about
we're Christian or not, even whether it's a Christian faith or a different faith. You know, at the time we got together previously, you and I spent some time talking about what it means to be a change agent from the inside, and I want to briefly share with you a story in memory of a very close friend of mine who was killed during his third tour of duty in Iraq, Major Alan Rogers. Alan was an example of the amazing change that can happen when we are who we are and we don't exclude ourselves from institutions and places that are right now have a barrier to full equality. Not only was Alan a major in the U.S. military, he would have retired this year with his full pension after 20 or 25 years. He was also an ordained Baptist minister. He was openly gay, and he was an African American. Now you talk about intersections of identities, and Alan, and when we would have time to get together, I would talk to him and say, Alan, you have to write a book. You have to write about what it's like for you to have all of these individual identities that, and honestly, I think particularly the LGBT movement sometimes segregates itself. It says, or we say to each other, you are not inclusive of me unless if you add my identity to the LGBT alphabet soup that I call it. And my response to that has been the act of claiming recognition comes from adding a letter excludes the people whose letter you're not adding on there. And I think the way that our movement moves forward to real change is to drop the barriers that come from self-segregating ourselves, drop identity politics, and integrate our lives together like Alan did.
Okay.
And say, yes, I'm going to be openly gay,
Right.
and I'm going to be in the military if that's what my passion is.
Right.
And yes, I'm going to be openly gay, and I'm going to identify as a Southern Baptist minister. And instead of pulling out of that and maybe even doing what's safe, I'm going to work from the inside to try to make a difference, because that's who I am and I'm going to honor that.
Right. And who he was all those things.
Right.
They were all
Right.
part of his identity.
Right.
Well, rest in the eternal grant unto him, O Lord. Very sorry about his passing.
Well, you know, in his passing, he continued to make a difference because the military chose to focus on him as the 4,000th casualty of the war, and they specifically hid the fact that he was an openly gay soldier fighting against Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that led to a whole bunch of news articles about his life, including a major feature story in New Yorker magazine. And Alan has become a symbol for, and we will celebrate when Don't Ask, Don't Tell is repealed in his name, that's for sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. That's a powerful story.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, what are some of the challenges coming up in Arizona in particular with changing political landscape? Our current governor is going to be heading off to Washington to take a position in the Obama administration. Does that change bring other changes? Are there other challenges that you and Wingspan and others need to address?
Sure. Let's be real. If there was a wave of change that came across the nation with the Obama presidency, that wave circled around our state. We were one of the few states where anti-gay conservatives actually picked up seats in the state legislature. And while we're very excited for Governor Napolitano to be a member of this incredible presidential administration, her departure puts Jan Brewer, noted right-wing conservative, into the governorship, and it takes away the check and balance that Governor Napolitano was able to put on our conservative legislature. We're also losing Representative Raul Grijalva, right, who is also going to the Obama administration. And so we're seeing a progressive talent drain from our state into Washington. And I think it means that we're going to have to come together cross-coalition in more ways than we have before. Again, breaking down these identity politic barriers. Oh, immigration isn't a gay issue. Oh, healthcare isn't a gay issue, and come together, because it's through building these coalitions that we're going to successfully defend ourselves against the onslaughts that I think are going to happen. And I'm afraid they're going to start coming after our families and our children. I think that the Religious Right has drawn fervor from their victory in making adoption and foster parenting by LGBT individuals or couples in Arkansas illegal via constitutional amendment, and that they're going to start coming after us. I think they're going to come after the domestic partner benefits that are being offered to both same-sex and opposite-sex couples for state employees. And we need to be there reminding the public, reminding Arizonans all the way that these are extremist policies that hurt people. They take rights away from people. They take families away from children. They take health care benefits away from people, and that this does not represent what Arizona is all about.
In contradistinction to one of the religious rights talking points, that there's a gay agenda that is seeking to create special rights for LGBT people. What you're saying is it's about having the same rights. It's about not taking away the rights that everyone else has.
Sure, granting the same or not taking them away. I mean, in the case of domestic partner benefits, because of an executive order from Governor Napolitano, both unmarried, straight, and same-sex couples can provide health care benefits for their families, and retirement benefits that stay with family members, so that someone who's been in a relationship for 3 decades, 50 years, suddenly doesn't lose their financial security when a partner who was a state employee passes away. Arizonans are not about leaving people without those basic needs. Fundamentally, I do not believe that Arizonans, even those who may come from a conservative faith perspective, really want to make it harder for children in the foster care system to find a loving home, really want to make it harder for people to maintain their physical and mental well-being through not having access to affordable, reasonable health care.
So maybe some common ground there.
Exactly.
That we can say these are the things that every human being deserves.
Exactly.
And we are human beings like everyone else.
Right.
And we need to benefit from the same
Right.
opportunities everyone else does.
These are not just equal rights, they are civil rights. And I think there's a really important distinction, because for me and for Wingspan, equality is not what we're achieving and that's it. Equality is the floor. That is our minimum requirement, that all people should have equal access to institutions, to family protections, to health care. That's the floor, right? The ceiling is rooted in the fundamental civil rights that all of us, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity expression, the whole thing, regardless of all those issues, should fundamentally have access to.
Well, I'm old enough to have been a child, at least, and a young teen during the civil rights era in the 1960s, which was about equal rights and equality and based on race.
Yes.
Are the LGBT issues the civil rights issue of our time, of our generation?
They are. And I think that we are making remarkable progress. Yes, our experience is very different. I would never make a direct parallel or a direct connection between what the African American experience or the Latino and Latina immigrant experience has been and the gay movement's experience. But at the core of all of our fights for equal rights and for civil rights are the fact that a majority is in some cases voting or attempting to take away or demonizing or creating an illness around a minority in our country. And the only way we're going to defeat it is to come together and work together.
Okay, great. So what are we going to be, what are we going to need to do as a community, not just Wingspan, not just the LGBT community, but all people who share a hope for inclusion and welcoming for everyone? What do we all need to be doing as we go forward in this next year here in Arizona?
Well, the key word is doing, because sitting at home and signing an online petition or going to a march and then going home, it's an important component of, but it can't be the end of the work that we do together. So we need to bring our organizations together and collaborate, do joint programming, put statements out on each other's issues. There are so many incredible volunteer opportunities.
And where would people contact Wingspan to get in touch with some of those volunteer opportunities?
Sure, you can call us at 520-624-1779 and inquire about when the next volunteer orientation is. In fact, I'm going to my first volunteer orientation on December 20th at 1 o'clock at Wingspan. And you can also go to our website at wingspan.org. And there's an entire community calendar. There's lists of partner organizations. If it's not at Wingspan that you want to volunteer, go to the Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation, the Tucson Interfaith HIV and AIDS Network, the Boys and Girls Club. Whatever it is that you feel connected to in your heart, give your time. And of course, if you have the resources, give your money too, because it enables us to keep the lights on and to do the programming that we're doing to make a difference in the community.
Well, very, very similar to what we say in our own faith community and our congregations. We like people to show up for worship. We like them to donate some money. We like them to volunteer. To all of those things being very important. As you said, it's good to go to the rallies and the marches and express our opinions, but there's also a need to donate with our resources, our talents, our skills and abilities. So very, very important to get involved is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And what are some of the particular things, just briefly in the last few minutes we have, that are in your mind the most important issues to get involved with over the next year or so?
Well, I'll go back to what I started talking about in the beginning, the Families You Know campaign. That is something that you can do from the comfort of your own home.
Great.
Sitting in front of your computer with a webcam. Folks who go to familiesyouknow.com can click on a video that my husband made, sharing the experience of when we got engaged in Agua Caliente Park as an example of the kind of story you can tell about your family, or write a story and upload your photo.
And volunteer orientations and...
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so back to www.wingspan.org.
Exactly.
And look for opportunities to connect with your organization, with other organizations,
Right.
and with faith communities and with civic organizations. And in other words, there's no shortage of work to be done.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But there is a way to connect and create
Great.
real change.
Great. Thank you again, Jason, for being here with us on Faith Matters. Really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for joining us today on Faith Matters. We hope you'll join us one day soon for worship, or as we talked earlier, perhaps you'd prefer one of Tucson's other progressive, welcoming, and inclusive spiritual communities. There are many of them here in Tucson. You can learn more about the liberal Catholic Church at www